While Ukraine is the most obvious victim of Russian aggression right now, it's far from the only one. The Kremlin's tendrils extend far and wide across Europe and beyond, and Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, has no qualms about disrupting and interfering in numerous nations, influencing their politics and sabotaging their societies from within. It's all part of his grand plan to gain as much power as possible. But Putin's plans just took a big blow, as one of his sinister schemes was exposed and shut down in the Eastern European country of Moldova. Nestled between Ukraine and Romania, Moldova was once part of the Soviet Union and has been long subject to Russian control and influence. Russian-backed forces have even held control over Transnistria, a narrow strip of land extending along the eastern side of the country, since the 1990s. Transnistria makes up around 12%, or about 1,607 square miles of Moldovan territory, giving Moscow quite a sizable foothold, and the area has its own currency, constitution, flag and anthem, despite not being formally recognized by the international community. Russia not only provides financial aid and other support to Transnistria, but has also conducted a range of disinformation campaigns and covert operations across the whole of Moldova, using its political powers to attempt to control the population and influence elections. But despite its best efforts, the Kremlin was unsuccessful at controlling the outcome of Moldova's last parliamentary elections in 2021, when the pro-European part of Action and Solidarity (PAS) enjoyed a landslide win over the pro-Russian bloc of communists and socialists. In the 2024 presidential election too, the pro-Russian candidate Alexander Stoyanoglo lost out, with incumbent president Maia Sandu being re-elected for a second term with over 55% of the popular vote. Throughout her time in power, Sandu has maintained a strong pro-Europe and anti-Russia stance. She, along with various members of the PAS party, has condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, expressed support for the Ukrainian people, and made anti-corruption campaigns and closer ties with the European Union major pillars of her leadership philosophy. However, another parliamentary election is mere days away, with the Moldovan people set to vote on September 28, and it appears that Russia has once more been attempting to interfere and sway the outcome in its favour. On Monday, Moldovan authorities announced they had arrested 74 people who were said to have been preparing for violent unrest ahead of the elections. According to officials, the suspects had travelled to Serbia to undergo training, allegedly with Russian instructors. They were taught about crowd control tactics, provocations during protests, and how to handle firearms, as well as techniques for resisting arrest and detention. The individuals were allegedly paid €400 each for taking part, but the scheme was uncovered and thwarted thanks to an investigation by Moldova's Organised Crime Prosecutor's Office and the General Police Inspectorate. The investigation found that some of the suspects had been tricked into going to Serbia under the pretext of a simple religious pilgrimage before being drafted into the training program. And it was Russia's own security services overseeing the entire operation, according to Alexandru Mustiatsu, the head of Moldova's intelligence service. According to the authorities, the pro-Russian fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor was also said to be involved in the plot. Shor was a major figure in a huge bank fraud scandal in Moldova in 2014, in which approximately $1 billion was taken out of Moldovan banks. He also set up a pro-Russian political party named the SOR Party, which ended up being banned by the Constitutional Court of Moldova in June 2023 for orchestrating protests across the country in 2022 and 2023, amongst other reasons. He currently lives in Russia, where he's been granted citizenship, but clearly remains on disrupting Moldovan politics and claims that the only path forward for Moldova is through union with the Russian Federation. A man named Andrei Pavlov reportedly directed recruitment for the recent Russian scheme in Moldova, using a network linked to Shor. Most of the group's communications took place on Telegram in order to preserve anonymity, but that wasn't enough to stop Moldova's investigators, who carried out over 250 searches at various locations around the country, including 4 prisons. These searches proved fruitful, as authorities found numerous weapons, ammunition, camouflage uniforms, passports and other materials that may have been used to cause chaos and sow division among Moldovan society. The police also uncovered links to certain Moldovan political parties, along with various criminal groups. The Socialist Party leader, Igor Dodon, admitted that 4 of his party members were among the 74 arrested, and if convicted, those suspects could face up to 8 years behind bars for their crimes. This news all comes mere days after major news outlets, including the BBC and Bloomberg, both published reports looking at Russian attempts to influence Moldova's upcoming elections. According to those reports, the Kremlin hatched a multi-pronged plan several months ago, finalizing the details in spring and deploying numerous tactics in a bid to undermine President Sandu's leadership and disrupt Moldova's efforts to join the European Union in the not-too-distant future. It's important to note that Moldova applied to join the EU in March 2022, very shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, and was granted candidate status in June 2022. In December 2023, the European Council opened accession negotiations with Moldova, and those negotiations began in earnest in June 2024. While President Sandu has set a 2030 as a target, the EU itself has not fixed an official date. Russia naturally doesn't want that. Moldova is one of an increasingly small number of European nations that is neither part of the EU nor the NATO alliance at this time, and that's exactly how Russia would like it to remain. As long as it's not in any major alliance, Moldova won't have the same protections or backing of other nations and will effectively remain within the Kremlin's grasp. But if and when Moldova enters the EU, everything could change, and the idea of Russia taking over or bringing the country back into some sort of Soviet Union-style alliance would effectively be over. That's why the Kremlin has been so eager to depose President Sandu and push the pro-Russian parties in Moldova into power. According to reporters, some of the tactics that Moscow has employed in Moldova include recruiting Moldovans abroad, including those that live in Russia, to vote at polling stations in the EU and other places, as well as deploying agents to stage disruptive protests aimed at building unrest and resentment for the current government. There's also been a widespread disinformation campaign online, where Russia has exploited social media sites to spread false narratives. On top of all that, documents obtained by investigative journalists also reveal that Putin's executive office also intends to use compromising material to pressure or blackmail public officials in Moldova in order to disrupt the electoral process. While Bloomberg's reporters weren't able to officially say one way or another if Russia was going ahead with all of these plans, several European government officials said it was almost certain that it was. Thankfully, Moldovan investigators and police forces have been rooting out and cracking down on Russia's sneaky tactics. In August alone, the authorities issued official requests to block over 440 TikTok channels that were deemed to be spreading misinformation. Over in Russia, meanwhile, the Kremlin has refuted accusations of electoral interference, continuing to state that it does not get involved in foreign elections, despite enormous evidence to the contrary. In 2024, around the time of the Moldovan presidential vote, a Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman claimed that any talk of Russian interference was simply Russophobia, adding that this was an essential component of the European Moldova project. President Sandu, however, maintains that Russia is quite clearly making its presence felt in the build-up to the next election, just as it has in the past. Speaking to EU lawmakers in Strasbourg earlier this month, Sandu said, "The Kremlin's goal is clear: to capture Moldova through the ballot box, to use us against Ukraine, and to turn us into a launchpad for hybrid attacks on the European Union. That's why this election is very important. By defending it, we protect not only Moldova, but also regional security and stability. Moldova may be the testing ground, but Europe is the target." And this is all part of a very long-running strategy from the Kremlin to disrupt and interfere in Moldovan politics, stretching back several years. Investigators have uncovered numerous plots and schemes in recent times, all eventually linking back to Russia one way or another. In October 2024, for example, Moldovan police uncovered an astonishing vote-buying scheme, once more involving the convicted oligarch Ilan Shor. The scheme involved a staggering $39 million in transfers being used to influence elections. According to police, 1 million separate bank transfers were done to Moldovan citizens' accounts via PSB, a Russian state-owned bank service, between September and October of 2024. This was all allegedly to buy votes in both the presidential election and Moldova's EU referendum, which were held on the exact same day. Approximately 500 people were fined for passive electoral corruption, and President Sandu stated that criminal groups involved had attempted to buy around 300,000 votes in total, with 138,000 Moldovan citizens proven to have received funds through the scheme, though the true number could be much larger. Later in 2024, another report emerged from Moldova's Security and Intelligence Service, SIS, which revealed the full extent of an extensive Russian operation to influence the outcomes of the presidential election and EU referendum. Once more, the details were astonishing in many ways, but not all that surprising given Russia's track record of corruption and interference. The scale and complexity of Russia's campaign was particularly startling to investigators, who uncovered evidence of Russian involvement in financial manipulation, social engineering, and disinformation. Their report revealed that in early 2024, Russia set up an operational command center in Moscow under the supervision of the Federal Security Service, FSB, Russia's main intelligence agency and the modern-day successor of the Soviet-era KGB. Again, Ilan Shor was also involved, and the main goal of this command center was to compromise Moldova's elections by almost any means necessary. The operation was organized in a complex pyramid-like structure, with the Moscow HQ sitting at the top of the pyramid, orchestrating finances and political strategies, while local Moldovan offices and communities sat further down the pyramid, carrying out other aspects of the campaign like legal matters, public relations, and youth coordination. In total, the report found 119 territorial cells dotted across Moldova, with 1,900 primary cells and around 33,000 paid activists essentially acting on behalf of the Kremlin to spread disruption nationwide. Those activists earn monthly payments of up to 3,000 lei, or around $180, and built a network that extended to over 80,000 sympathizers, giving the Kremlin even more manpower to spread its messaging and misinformation. Two central platforms led the charge of the Russian-backed campaign: the Evrazia Organization and the Victory Bloc of political parties. Evrazia was set up in Moscow in April 2024, allegedly as a non-commercial organization that secretly served as a conduit to promote Russian influence and recruit young Moldovans to the cause through sponsored visits to Russia. The Victory Bloc, meanwhile, was made up of pro-Shor parties, all under the influence of Russia's own ruling party, United Russia. The report also looked into the sneaky and surreptitious ways in which the Kremlin financially backed this operation. It used a range of methods of moving money around, including transporting cash directly from Russia to Moldova, as well as using bank transfers from sanctioned banks in Russia via Central Asian intermediaries and onwards to Moldova. Crypto payments and specially issued Russian payment cards were also involved, and a complex system of fake donations was set up to hide how the Kremlin was funding its campaign. There was also a major media and disinformation campaign involving hundreds of TikTok channels, Telegram accounts, Facebook groups, and bots on the Russian social media site Kontaktium. Together, these social media disruptors made fake government websites, invested tens of thousands of euros in social media ads to promote anti-EU and pro-Russian messages, and spread disinformation to as many Moldovan citizens as possible. On top of all that, Russia even attempted to exploit people's religious beliefs for its own ends. It allegedly paid for around 500 Moldovan Orthodox priests to fly to Moscow, where they were offered Russian cards and promised large payments if they used their positions of power and influence to sway voters and spread anti-EU messaging in their communities. But arguably, the most worrying element of the entire report revolved around Russia's plans for the younger people of Moldova. The organizers allegedly set up camps and training programs in Moscow and Bosnia-Herzegovina, where young people were instructed in protest tactics, encounters with law enforcement, and how to manipulate crowds. Some even received more advanced military-level training in how to operate drones and create improvised devices. And some of those young people who took part in these programs were later found to have carried out acts of vandalism on government buildings in Moldova. This all leads right back up to the recent arrests, which also involved many young people being trained and prepared to kick off violent protests and civil unrest across the country. It's all part of the same ugly yet remarkably complex scheme that Russia has clearly been running for a long time. And it's a scheme that's unlikely to stop, even with the recent arrests and Moldova's police doing a stellar job of uncovering corruption and taking the necessary steps to stop it where they can. It's something that the country has simply had to adapt to and deal with, and it's something that President Sandu in particular has faced head-on throughout her time in office. She sounded the alarm about Russian interference on numerous occasions, like back in April when she stated that Russia was planning to take control of Moldovan political leadership. In a TV interview, Sandu made a very accurate prediction. We saw unprecedented interference last year, and it's absolutely clear that this year Russia will again try to influence the outcome of the elections. Sandu also warned that if Russia was successful and managed to install its own loyal or puppet government in Moldova, it could easily use the country against Ukraine. And given that Moldova sits in a strategic location to the west of Ukraine, with a nearly 760-mile border between the two nations, it could give Russia an extraordinary advantage in its ongoing war. It could even open up a whole new front in the fight, with Russia sending forces into Ukraine from the west and east, simultaneously changing the course of the war in an instant. As Sandu notes, of course, there are risks for Ukraine, but at the same time, the risks for the Republic of Moldova also increase because in this way, Russia could drag Moldova into the war. The Moldovan president also said that Moldova currently provides a kind of shield for large parts of Ukraine, but that it could transform from a protective force into a serious threat should the Kremlin get what it wants. Now, she's sounding the alarm all over again, warning that Russia is going all out in its bid to subvert the next elections. Speaking on September 22, Sandu accused Russia of using extortionate amounts of money to subvert democracy. The Kremlin is pouring hundreds of millions of euros to buy hundreds of thousands of votes on both banks of the Dnistru River and abroad. People are intoxicated daily with lies. Hundreds of individuals are paid to provoke disorder, violence, and spread fear. If Russia gains control over Moldova, the consequences will be immediate and dangerous for our country and for the entire region. Every Moldovan will suffer, no matter who they voted for. Journalists and EU officials have also spoken out about Russian interference, with Kaja Kallas, Vice President of the European Commission, writing on X, Moldova faces hybrid threats ahead of its elections. Russia is likely to use cash, content and coercion to meddle. Let there be no doubt, only the people of Moldova should decide their future, free from interference. EU leaders are also doing all they can to counteract the Kremlin's operations, with numerous leaders like French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk visiting Moldova's capital, Chisinau, in August. However, the outcome of the election hangs in the balance, with polls suggesting that the ruling PAS party may still win a majority of votes but lose its majority in parliament and be forced into a coalition with one or more other parties. PAS also faces strong opposition from various groups, including the pro-Russian Party of Socialists of the Republic of Moldova, led by former Moldovan President Igor Dodon, who claims that the ruling party of Moldova is using its power and resources to intimidate and suppress its competition, also stating that certain Western powers are interfering in the election campaign. It's worth noting, however, that Dodon has been arrested in the past and charged with corruption and illegal financing of a political party, so his words are not exactly a gospel of truth. As well as interfering in Moldovan elections, evidence also suggests that Russia has been getting involved in other political processes in countries like Georgia and Romania, where investigations have also uncovered Kremlin plots to subvert the democratic process via online disinformation campaigns and other methods. And even if the Moldovan election doesn't go Russia's way, reports state that the Kremlin has trained young men to stage violent protests across the country and suggest that the election was corrupt to continue piling the pressure on Sandu and the PAS party. While the outcome of the election remains unclear for now, one thing seems certain: Russian interference in Moldova and other nations will not stop, and the country will continue to sow seeds of chaos and disruption wherever it can. It's up to nations and populations across Europe and beyond to resist Russian interference and not to allow the Kremlin to disrupt democracy. Now, learn more about how Moldova's Transnistria region could be at threat of a major Russian invasion in this video. Or, for a more recent look at how other European nations are responding to Kremlin aggression, learn how Estonia is ready to down any Russian jets that enter its airspace in the days and weeks ahead. And finally, be sure to subscribe to our channel as well, to be among the first to find out about the latest news and developments from the front lines of Ukraine and beyond.